The galaxy had seen many species rise and fall over millions of years, but none had ever confused the elder races quite like the humans did when they first stepped out into the stars 300 years ago. The great powers of the Galactic Concord discovered a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the Milky Way. And on this planet they found something unexpected, a species that had just learned to travel beyond their own moon. The Valtteri Dominion was the first to make contact, and their ambassador looked upon the humans with the same expression a wealthy merchant might give to a beggar on the street, seeing nothing but weakness and opportunity in equal measure. "These creatures are soft," the ambassador reported back to his government, "and they seem to value something they call peace above all other things, which makes them perfect subjects for integration into our labor programs within 10 years of first contact." The Galactic Concord had claimed 40% of humanity's solar system as what they called an integration tribute, taking the asteroid belts and outer moons that humans had only begun to explore and mine. The humans protested through official channels, filing complaint after complaint with the Concord's bureaucracy. But their protests were ignored, and their complaints were filed away in archives that nobody would ever read. What surprised the elder races was that the humans did not fight back, not even when the Valtteri ambassador publicly mocked Earth's representatives at a Concord gathering, calling them the galaxy's most pathetic species, to roars of laughter from the assembled delegates. Instead, the human ambassador simply smiled, thanked the assembly for their time, and returned to Earth report what had happened. "They think we are weak," she told the United Earth Council in a closed session. "And for now, we will let them continue to think this, because we are not ready, and a war fought today would be a war we cannot win." The Council agreed. And so began humanity's long strategy of patience over the next 50 years. The insults and injuries continued to pile up like snow on a mountain, each one adding weight to the burden humanity carried in silence. The Krethax Collective, a species of 8-foot-tall predators with scales like armor and claws like knives, began raiding human frontier colonies for what they called hunting practice, taking young men and women and releasing them into wilderness preserves to be chased down for sport when Earth demanded the return of their citizens. The Krethax ambassador laughed and asked, "Why would we return prey to their herd when the hunt has already been so entertaining?" The humans filed another complaint with the Concord, and the Concord ruled that since the Krethax had not technically violated any treaties, no action would be taken. 347 humans died in those hunting preserves over the next decade, and Earth recorded every single name. The Zorvathi hegemony, ruled by a species of cold-blooded reptilians who believed themselves to be the rightful masters of all creation, began demanding that human ships pay tribute whenever they passed through Zorvathi space, even though the hyperspace lanes in question had been declared neutral territory by the Concord itself. When human captains refused to pay, their ships were impounded and their crews were sold into slavery in markets that the Concord pretended did not exist. Earth sent diplomats to negotiate for the return of these enslaved humans, and the diplomats were kept waiting for months before being told that the slaves had already been sold to private buyers whose identities could not be disclosed. The humans smiled, thanked the Zorvathi for their time, and returned home with empty hands but full memories. "We are keeping count," the human ambassador told her government, "and one day the count will be settled." But still, humanity did not fight. Other species watched this behavior with growing contempt, unable to understand why a species with nuclear weapons and a history of bloody warfare would simply accept such treatment without striking back. "They are cowards," declared the Valtteri High Minister in a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. "And cowards deserve nothing but the scraps that fall from the tables of their betters." This speech was met with applause from every corner of the Concorde, and humanity became a joke among the stars. The species that everyone could push around without fear of consequences. What no one outside of Earth understood was that humanity was not being weak. They were being strategic in secret facilities, hidden in asteroid belts and buried beneath the surfaces of dead moons. Human scientists and engineers worked around the clock on technologies that would take centuries to perfect. They studied the weapons of every species they encountered, learning how each one worked and how each one could be defeated. And they improved upon these designs in ways that their creators had never imagined. They mapped every hyperspace lane in the galaxy, including the secret military routes that the elder races thought were known only to themselves. And they stored this information in databases that were protected by encryption so advanced that even the Velthary's best codebreakers could not touch it. They trained soldiers in ways of war that the galaxy had never seen, combining ancient human martial traditions with cutting-edge technology to create warriors who could fight in any environment and against any enemy. And most importantly, they created something called the contingency. Only 12 humans in the entire species knew the full details of the contingency. But every human alive knew that it existed, a plan for the day when patience was no longer possible, when the accumulated insults and injuries could no longer be borne, when humanity would finally show the galaxy what it was truly capable of. We are not doormats, the human military commander told his officers in a secret briefing. We are a trap waiting to be sprung, and when that day comes, every species that has ever wronged us will learn the true meaning of regret. The officers nodded in understanding, and they returned to their posts to continue preparing for a war that might not come for another 100 years. Meanwhile, the insults continued. Human colonies were raided, human ships were seized, human citizens were enslaved and murdered and used for entertainment, and through it all, humanity smiled and filed complaints and asked politely for justice that never came. The Concorde's archives filled with thousands of human complaints, each one documented in precise detail with dates and names and evidence that nobody bothered to review. Why do they keep filing these useless documents? A Concorde bureaucrat once asked his colleague, genuinely puzzled by human behavior. Because they are weak and stupid, his colleague replied. And weak, stupid species do weak, stupid things. But the complaints were not useless. And humanity was neither weak nor stupid. Every complaint was a record. Every record was evidence. And every piece of evidence was a count in the tally that humanity was keeping against the species that had wronged them in schools across human space. Children learned about the injustices their species had suffered, not to make them angry, but to make them remember. Because humanity understood that anger fades, but memory endures. One day, teachers told their students, "You may be called upon to answer for these crimes against our people. And when that day comes, you must be ready." The children nodded solemnly, and they grew up knowing that they were part of something larger than themselves, a species that had chosen patience over rage, strategy over impulse, and preparation over premature action. 300 years passed, and the galaxy continued to believe that humans were the weakest species among the stars, good for nothing but labor and entertainment and target practice. They could not have been more wrong deep in the heart of human space. The war machine waited in silence, growing stronger with each passing year, fed by the memories of every insult and injury that the galaxy had inflicted upon humanity. The trap was set. All it needed was someone foolish enough to spring it. By the year 2487, humanity's patience had been stretched to the breaking point. Though the galaxy remained blind to the tension building beneath the surface of human space, the provocations had grown worse with each passing decade, as if the elder races were competing with each other to see who could inflict the most suffering. upon the species they considered beneath their notice. The Kreth-Axe Collective had expanded their hunting operations from occasional raids to organized entertainment, broadcasting their hunts across the galactic network for paying subscribers who wanted to watch humans run and scream and die for their amusement. Millions of credits changed hands as viewers bet on which human would survive the longest, and the Kreth-Axe hunters became celebrities in their own right, famous for their creative methods of prolonging the terror before the final kill. Earth's government recorded every broadcast, identified every hunter, and added their names to a list that grew longer with each passing month. The Velthari Dominion had moved beyond simple insults to outright conquest, annexing 3 human agricultural colonies on the edge of the frontier and declaring the 2 million humans living there to be integration assets under Velthari law. These humans were forced to work in crystal mines beneath alien suns, their children separated from their parents and placed in education facilities that were really indoctrination centers designed to erase their human identity. When Earth demanded the return of these colonists, the Velthari ambassador simply smiled and said, "They are no longer your concern. They belong to us now, and they will serve us until they die." The human ambassador recorded this conversation and transmitted it back to Earth, where it was played in every city and every home. And 2 billion humans watched in silence as their government added another count to the tally. But it was the Zorvathi hegemony that would finally push humanity past the point of no return. Grand Hegemon Thalvex was an ambitious leader, the kind who measured his worth by the suffering he could inflict upon those weaker than himself. And he had grown tired of the small indignities his species had inflicted upon humanity. He wanted something grander, something that would cement his name in the history of the galaxy, something that would prove once and for all that the Zarvathi were the supreme species in all of creation. His intelligence officers brought him information about a human project called the Cradle, a massive generation ship carrying nearly 850,000 colonists in cryogenic sleep toward a distant star system where humanity hoped to establish their largest settlement. Yet among those colonists were 200,000 children, the sons and daughters of humanity's best and brightest, chosen to carry human civilization to a new world where they could grow and flourish far from the cruelty of the Concord. "This is what we have been looking for," Thalvex told his admirals, his cold reptilian eyes gleaming with anticipation. "And when we destroy it, the humans will finally understand their place in the galaxy." The Zorvathi fleet intercepted the Cradle in deep space, far from any human patrol routes, and the colonists never even woke from their frozen sleep before the missile struck. There was no warning, no demand for surrender, no opportunity to escape, just fire and silence and the endless cold of space. When the debris field reached human sensors 3 days later, the identification systems began sorting through the wreckage, matching fragments to passenger manifests, and the names began scrolling across screens in every human settlement from Earth to the farthest frontier colony. Name after name after name. Mothers and fathers and grandparents and children. 847,000 souls reduced to atoms in frozen metal, including 200,000 young faces that would never grow old, never fall in love, never have children of their own. The galaxy had seen human grief before. The quiet tears and the formal complaints and the polite requests for justice that everyone ignored. But they had never seen what happened next. Humanity fell silent. For 3 days, no human spoke to any alien species. No human ship left port. No human business conducted trade. And the silence spread across human space like a blanket of snow falling on a winter night. The elder races assumed that humanity was grieving, that they would cry their tears and file their complaints and eventually return to their role as the galaxy's punching bag. But they assumed wrong in that silence. Something unprecedented was happening. Every adult human in the galaxy was participating in a vote. A simple question transmitted to every personal device and every public terminal and every ship and station where humans lived and worked. The question was this: shall the contingency be executed? There were no speeches, no debates, no campaigns for or against. Just the question and the weight of 300 years of accumulated suffering pressing down on every human soul. The vote took 72 hours. And when the results were tallied, the number was staggering in its unanimate entity. 4.7% of humanity had voted yes. The contingency would be executed on the fourth day of silence. Humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Concord requested an emergency session of the High Council, and the elder races gathered in the Great Assembly Hall. Curious to see what pathetic plea the humans would offer this time, Ambassador Sarah Chun walked to the speaking platform alone, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. And she stood before the assembled delegates with a stillness that made some of them uncomfortable without understanding why. Distinguished members of the Concord, she began, her voice calm and measured. I come before you today not to file a complaint, not to request justice, and not to beg for mercy. The delegates shifted in their seats, unused to hearing a human speak without the usual groveling tone they had come to expect. 300 years ago, you found us in our cradle, and you decided that we were weak, that we were prey, that we existed only to serve your amusement and your profit. She paused, and her eyes moved slowly across the chamber, meeting the gaze of every species that had wronged humanity. You hunted our children for sport. You enslaved our families in your minds. You stole our colonies and erased our culture. And when we asked for justice, you laughed in our faces and told us to be grateful for the scraps you allowed us to keep. The Krethak's ambassador shifted uncomfortably, and the Velthari delegate reached for a drink with trembling hands. 4 days ago, the Zorvathi hegemony destroyed a ship carrying 847,000 of our people, including 200,000 children, who had never done anything to anyone except dream of a better future. Her voice remained steady, but something in her eyes had changed, something cold and ancient and terrible. We asked for peace, and you gave us war. We asked for fairness, and you gave us contempt. We asked for mercy, and you gave us death. She drew a breath that seemed to draw all the warmth from the chamber. You have made your final mistake. The delegates began to murmur, sensing that something was different, that the human standing before them was not the same creature they had mocked for 3 centuries. As of this moment, humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Concord. All treaties are void, all agreements are cancelled, and all debts are called due. She turned to face Grand Hegemon Thales directly, and her next words were spoken with a precision that cut like surgical lasers. May whatever gods you worship have mercy on you, because we will not. Then she walked out of the chamber without looking back, and every human in the galaxy began moving toward designated rally points that had been established centuries ago for exactly this moment. The trap had been sprung in hidden shipyards scattered across human space. Lights flickered on for the first time in decades, and machines that had been waiting in cold silence began to warm up and hum with power. The war humanity had been preparing for since the day they first met their galactic neighbors was about to begin. And the species that had spent 3 centuries laughing at human weakness were about to learn a terrible truth: humanity had never been weak. They had been waiting. The elder races of the galaxy had studied human history in great detail, but they had made the fatal mistake of dismissing what they found as primitive and irrelevant to modern warfare. They knew about the world wars that had scarred Earth's 20th century, the millions of dead and the cities reduced to rubble. But they saw these conflicts as evidence of human savagery rather than human capability. They fight each other with crude weapons over patches of dirt. The Velthari Military Academy taught its officers, and they lacked the sophistication to pose any threat to a spacefaring civilization. The Krethags believed that humans were prey animals, soft and slow and easy to catch, good for nothing but running and screaming and dying in entertaining ways. The Zorvathi were so confident in their superiority that Grand Hegemon Thalvex did not even bother to increase his border defenses after destroying the cradle. Assuming that the humans would simply cry and complain as they always had, they were all about to learn how wrong they had been within 72 hours of Ambassador Chen's declaration. Humanity revealed a war machine that had been building in secret for 200 years, and the galaxy watched in disbelief as the weak species transformed before their eyes. Hidden shipyards carved into asteroids and buried beneath the surfaces of dead moons came online simultaneously, their massive doors opening to release fleets that no intelligence agency had known existed. Ships that emerged were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Sleek and angular, and covered in armor that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. And their weapons arrays bristled with technologies that human scientists had developed in secret and never revealed to any outside observer. The Concords intelligence analysts scrambled to understand what they were seeing, but their databases had no record of the weapon systems, the propulsion technologies, or the materials that made up these terrifying vessels. Where did they get this? Demanded the Velthari High Admiral when the first reports reached his desk. Our spies have been watching their shipyards for decades, and we never saw anything like this. What he did not understand was that the shipyards his spies had been watching were decoys, carefully designed to show exactly what humanity wanted the galaxy to see: a modest fleet of defensive vessels that pose no threat to anyone. The real ships had been built elsewhere, in facilities so well hidden that not even the most advanced sensors could detect them. And they had been waiting for this moment for generations, but the ships were not. What truly frightened the elder races, it was the humans themselves. The Krethax Collective was the first to encounter human soldiers in ground combat, and the experience shattered everything they believed about their prey. Krethax hunting party had cornered a squad of human marines on a frontier moon, expecting the same easy victory they had enjoyed in their entertainment hunts. But these humans did not run and scream and beg for mercy. They fought back with a ferocity that made the Krethax hunters freeze in confusion. And when the humans were wounded, they kept fighting. And when they ran out of ammunition, they used knives. And when their knives broke, they used their bare hands. What are these creatures? A wounded Krethax hunter gasped into his communicator as the last human marine crawled toward him despite having lost both legs below the knee. They will not stop. Why will they not stop? The answer lay in human biology, in the evolutionary heritage that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive and irrelevant. Humans were persistence predators, a species that had evolved on the African savanna to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. And this heritage had given them something that no other species in the galaxy possessed: the ability to simply refuse to quit where other species would surrender when the odds turned against them. Humans dug in and fought harder. Where other species would retreat when wounded, humans kept advancing. Where other species measured victory by acceptable losses, humans measured it by whether any enemy remained standing. Krethax hunting parties that had terrorized human colonies for decades found themselves being hunted in return, pursued across star systems by human forces that never stopped, never rested, never gave them a moment of peace. They do not fight like civilized beings, a Krethax general reported to his government, his voice trembling with something that sounded very much like fear. They fight like animals, like monsters, like something from our oldest nightmares. The Velthari Dominion fared no better when they attempted to use their superior intelligence to outmaneuver the human fleets. The Velthari had always prided themselves on their strategic sophistication. their ability to predict enemy movements and counter them before they happened. And they assumed that humans would be easy to outthink instead. They found their every plan anticipated, their every secret exposed, their every surprise attack met with ambush that decimated their forces before they could fire a single shot. How do they know what we are planning? The Velthari High Minister demanded when the fifth consecutive operation ended in catastrophic failure. Our encryption is unbreakable. Our communications are secure. Our planning sessions are held in shielded chambers. What the Velthari did not understand was that human intelligence officers had spent 2 centuries learning to think, like every species in the galaxy, studying their psychology, their culture, their decision-making patterns, and their unconscious bias as humans. It turned out, were horrifyingly good at getting inside other minds, at understanding what their enemies would do before they did it, at predicting behavior with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. We do not need to break your codes, a captured human intelligence officer told his Velthari interrogators with a smile. We just need to understand you, and after 300 years of watching you treat us like dirt, we understand you very well indeed. The Zorvathi hegemony faced the full fury of humanity's rage, and Grand Hegemon Thalvex watched his empire crumble with growing horror. Human fleets bypassed the hegemony's military formations entirely, striking at population centers and communication hubs and the infrastructure that held Zorvathi civilization together. And at first, Thalvex assumed they were trying to terrorize his people into surrender, but the humans were not attacking civilians. They were rescuing them. Every human who had been enslaved in Zorvathi space, every colonist who had been taken in raids, every prisoner who had been sold in the markets that the Concord pretended did not exist, was being systematically located and extracted by human special forces teams that seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. They are not trying to conquer us, Thalvex realized as he watched another slave market go up in flames on his tactical display. The human captives already gone before the first Zorvathi response team could arrive. They are not trying to occupy our territory or claim our resources. His scales had gone pale with a fear he had never experienced before. The fear of a predator who suddenly realizes he has become prey. They are coming for us, across the galaxy. A phrase began spreading through military communications and intelligence briefings and terrified whispers between officers who had never known defeat. The humans are not conquering, they are hunting. Unlike the Krethax hunts that had killed humans for sport, this hunt would not end until every debt had been paid in full. The war had only been going for 3 weeks. But already the elder races understood that everything they had believed about humanity was wrong. These were not the weak, pathetic creatures they had mocked for 3 centuries. These were predators who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment to reveal their true nature. And now that the mask had fallen, the galaxy would never see them the same way again. The hunt had begun, and humanity would not rest until it was finished. The war lasted 11 months, and by any conventional measure of galactic conflict, humanity should have been crushed within the first few weeks. The combined military forces of the elder races outnumbered human forces by more than 1,000 to 1. Their industrial capacity dwarfed humanity's modest territory by a factor of 10,000, and their experience in interstellar warfare stretched back millions of years. While humans had only been spacefaring for a few centuries. Every military projection, every computer simulation, every analysis by the finest strategic minds in the galaxy concluded that humanity would be defeated quickly and decisively, reduced to a footnote in the history of species who had dared to challenge their betters. But humanity did not fight a conventional war. They fought like humans. The first thing humanity did was reach out to every species that had suffered under the rule of the elder powers, the small and weak civilizations that had been bullied and exploited and forgotten. And they offered them something that no galactic power had ever offered before. "Help us," the human envoy said. "And when this war is over, you will be free. You will be treated as equals. You will never again bow before masters who see you as nothing more than resources to be consumed." Dozens of species answered the call, not with fleets or armies, but with something even more valuable: information. Slav workers on Velthari. Industrial worlds sent the locations of ammunition factories to human intelligence. Servants in Zolothi palaces transmitted the schedules of military commanders. Traders who had been cheated by Krethex. Merchants shared the locations of secret supply caches. The galaxy's oppressed became humanity's eyes and ears. A network of spies and informants that stretched into every corner of enemy territory. And the elder races never suspected that the species they had dismissed as worthless were feeding their secrets to the humans they had dismissed as weak. The second thing humanity did was refuse to play by the rules of galactic warfare when the Velthari assembled a massive fleet to crush the human homeworld. Human forces did not meet them in a glorious battle. Instead, they struck at the supply convoys that kept the fleet fueled and armed, destroyed the communication relays that allowed the admirals to coordinate their ships, and picked off stragglers with hit-and-run attacks that drove the Velthari commanders mad with frustration. Stand and fight like civilized beings. The Velthari High Admiral screamed into the void as another of his supply ships vanished in a flash of antimatter. But the humans did not answer because they were already gone, already moving to their next target, already planning their next strike. The third thing humanity did was simply refuse to stop. Other species needed rest rotations of 70% of their forces to maintain combat effectiveness. Their soldiers requiring regular cycles of sleep and recovery that were built into their biology and their military doctrine. Humans operated on rotating skeleton crews, pushing themselves to the edge of collapse and then pushing further, drinking stimulants that would have killed other species and eating ration bars, while they ran to their battle stations and catching fragments of sleep whenever they could. How do they maintain this tempo? A Kreth-Axe commander demanded when his analysts showed him the operational data. They've been fighting without pause for 6 weeks. Their crew should be dead from exhaustion. A captured human pilot, barely conscious from sleep deprivation, still managed to smile at his interrogators before answering, "We drink coffee, and we hate you." The combination of these three elements, the galaxy-wide intelligence network, the unconventional tactics, and the relentless operational tempo, created a war that the elder races had no idea how to fight one by one. The great powers began to fall. The Kreth-Axe collective was the first to break. Their homeworld surrounded by human forces who broadcast a simple message on every channel: surrender the leaders responsible for the hunting programs, or face consequences that would make their extinction look merciful for 3 days. The Kreth-Axe government refused, believing that humanity was bluffing, that the weak species they had hunted for so long would never actually follow through on such a threat on the 4th day. UN forces began systematically destroying every hunting preserve in Kreth-Axe space, every arena where humans had been killed for sport, every facility connected to the entertainment industry that had profited from human suffering. They did not kill the Kreth-Axe civilians who lived and worked in these places. Instead, they evacuated them first, transported them to safety, and only then reduced the buildings to rubble. Why are they doing this? A Kreth-Axe civilian asked as she watched her former workplace collapse in flames. They could have killed us all. Why did they save us? A human marine standing nearby heard the question and answered without looking at her. Because we are not you. The Kreth-Axe government surrendered the next day, handing over every individual who had participated in the hunting programs to stand trial before a human tribunal. And the proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy for all to see. Justice, the humans demonstrated, was not the same as vengeance. The Velthari Dominion did not surrender. It collapsed from within human intelligence teams, released decades of evidence documenting the corruption of the Velthari government, the secret deals with criminal organizations, the embezzlement of public funds, the murders of political opponents, and the lies that have been told to justify centuries of expansion and exploitation. The Velthari people, who had been taught that their government was the most enlightened in the galaxy, watched in horror as the truth unfolded before their eyes, and within weeks, riots had broken out in every major city. The High Minister fled his palace one step ahead of his own people, and the provisional government that replaced him immediately sued for peace with humanity. Desperate to end the war before their civilization tore itself apart, the Galactic Concord, the institution that had united the elder races and enabled their domination of weaker species, simply dissolved without the Velthari to enforce its edicts and the Krethax to intimidate its critics. The Concord had no power, and the smaller species who had chafed under its rule for millions of years seized the opportunity to declare their independence. Humanity did not try to stop them. Instead, human diplomats helped negotiate the peaceful dissolution of the old order, ensuring that the transition happened without the bloodshed that usually accompanied the fall of empires. Only the Zorvathi hegemony remained. Grand Hegemon Thalvex holed up in his palace with the remnants of his military, refusing to accept that the war was lost. Human forces surrounded the Zorvathi homeworld, and Ambassador Chun transmitted a final message to the beings who had murdered 847,000 of her people, including 200,000 children. "You have 1 day to surrender," she said, her voice carrying no emotion at all. "After that, we are coming for you personally." Thalvex did not believe she was serious. How could he, after a lifetime of viewing humans as beneath his notice? 24 hours later, human marines breached the palace doors. The Grand Hegemon's personal guards fought bravely, but they were facing soldiers who had spent 11 months hunting the most dangerous species in the galaxy. And the battle was over in Minutus. Thalvex was found hiding in a secure bunker beneath his throne room, his scales pale with terror, and when the human marines dragged him out into the light, he finally understood what he had done when he gave the order to destroy the cradle. He had awakened something that should have been left. Sleeping. The trial that followed was not quick, and it was not merciful, but it was just every name from the cradle was read aloud. Every child's face was displayed on screens across the galaxy, and Thalvex was forced to acknowledge each one before the assembled witnesses. It took 11 days. When it was over, Thalvex was not executed. Death, the humans decided, was too easy an escape for someone who had caused so much suffering. Instead, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his very long life in a facility where he would watch recordings of the families he had destroyed, listen to the voices of the children he had killed, and be reminded every single day of what his ambition had cost. "You wanted to be remembered," the human judge told him as the sentence was pronounced. "Congratulations, you will never be forgotten." The war was over. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never be the same again. In the aftermath of the war, the galaxy held its breath and waited for the hammer to fall. Every species that had survived the conflict knew what came next. It was the same story that had played out 1,000 times across galactic history. The eternal cycle of conquest and subjugation that defined the relationship between the strong and the weak. The humans had won, which meant they would now become the new masters, claiming the territories of the defeated, installing puppet governments to serve their interests, demanding tribute and obedience from species that had no choice but to comply. The Velthari prepared their surrender documents and wondered which of their colonies would be taken. The Krethax steeled themselves for the humiliation of becoming a subject race, and the remnants of the Zorvathi hegemony assumed that their entire civilization would be dismantled and scattered across the stars. They waited for humanity to show its true face, to reveal the hunger for domination that lurked beneath the mask of righteous anger. Instead, humanity did something that no one expected. They went home human. Forces withdrew from every territory they had occupied during the war, leaving behind nothing but the ruins of military installations they had destroyed and the freed slaves they had liberated. They kept no conquered worlds, claimed no new resources, installed no puppet governments, demanded no tribute, and established no empire. The galaxy watched in stunned confusion as human ships jumped back to their original territory, as human soldiers returned to their families, as the greatest military machine the galaxy had ever seen simply powered down and went quiet. What are they doing? The Provisional Velthari government asked their analysts, convinced that this must be some kind of trick. No species wins a war and then walks away. There must be something we are missing. But there was nothing to miss. Humanity had done exactly what Ambassador Chun had promised in her declaration. Of war they had not fought for conquest, or power, or territory. They had fought because they had no other choice, because their patience had finally reached its limit, because the crimes committed against them had become too great to bear in silence, and now that the debt had been paid, they were done. A new ambassador traveled to the Reformed Council that had replaced the Galactic Concord. A young woman named Maya Okonkwo, who had lost her younger sister on the cradle and had spent the war serving as a medic on the front lines. She stood before the assembled delegates, representatives of 100 species who had once laughed at humanity and now regarded them with something that looked very much like fear. And she spoke in a voice that carried no anger, no resentment, no desire for further bloodshed. "We did not want this war," she began, "and we take no joy in the suffering it caused, not even the suffering of those who wronged us." The delegates shifted in their seats, unused to hearing a victor speak with such restraint. 300 years ago, we came to the stars hoping to find friends, hoping to join a community of civilizations that would welcome us and treat us with the respect that all sentient beings deserve. She paused, and her eyes moved across the chamber, meeting the gaze of species that had once hunted her people for sport. Instead, we found masters who saw us as prey, as slaves, as entertainment, as nothing more than resources to be exploited and discarded when we were no longer useful. The Krethax delegate lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "We asked for peace, and you gave us war. We asked for fairness, and you gave us contempt. We asked to raise our children without fear, and you murdered them for your amusement." Her voice remained steady, but there was a weight to her words that pressed down on every being in the chamber. "So we taught ourselves to fight. We built weapons you could not imagine. We trained soldiers you could not defeat, and when you pushed us too far, we showed you what humanity is capable of when we have nothing left to lose." She drew a breath and continued, "But we did not fight to become like you. We did not win this war so that we could take your place as the galaxy's oppressors. And we have no interest in ruling over species who would only resent us for our power." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber, delegates exchanging confused glances. "What we want is simple. We want to trade fairly. We want to explore freely. We want to raise our children without fear of them being hunted or enslaved or murdered for someone else's entertainment." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something quiet and serious. "We want peace. Real peace, not the false peace of the strong dominating the weak, but the true peace of equals who respect each other's right to exist." The chamber was silent, every delegate hanging on her next words. "That is what we are offering you today, a chance to start over, to build something better than the Concord ever was, to create a galaxy where every species is treated with dignity, regardless of how powerful they are, or how long they have been spacefaring." She straightened and looked around the chamber one final time. "But understand this, the door we opened cannot be closed." Her voice hardened, and for a moment, the delegates saw something in her eyes that reminded them why they had learned to fear. Humanity, we know how to break each of you now. We know your weaknesses, your fears, your secrets. We know exactly what it would take to reduce your civilizations to ash. And we will not forget this knowledge. She let the silence stretch for a long moment before continuing. If any species ever again harms a human child, ever again enslaves a human colonist, ever again treats humanity as prey to be hunted for sport, we will return, and next time, we will not be merciful. The warning hung in the air like a blade suspended over every head in the chamber. Next time, we will not leave anyone to remember. She nodded once, as if concluding a simple business transaction, and then she smiled a genuine smile. Warm and human and completely at odds with the terrible promise she had just made. But I do not believe that will be necessary. I believe that we can build something better together. I believe that the galaxy has learned from its mistakes. And I believe that the next 300 years will be very different from the last. She turned and walked toward the exit, then paused at the door and looked back. Welcome to the new era. My friends, I suggest you make the most of it. In the years that followed, humanity became something new in galactic politics. Not a conqueror, not an empire, but a guardian weaker species that had been bullied by the elder powers, sought human protection, and found it freely given. Trade agreements that had once been instruments of exploitation were renegotiated on fair terms, and the old hierarchies of domination and subjugation began to crumble as species realized that the galaxy's former doormats had become its apex predators, predators who chose peace, but could choose otherwise at any moment. The children of the galaxy grew up learning a new kind of history, one that included the story of a species that had been pushed to the edge of extinction and had pushed back harder than anyone thought possible. A species that had shown mercy to its enemies, even when mercy was not deserved. A species that had won the greatest war in galactic history, and then simply gone home. Historians would later identify the destruction of the cradle as the pivotal moment in galactic civilization, the event that separated the old era of exploitation from the new era of cooperation, not because of the tragedy itself, but because of what it revealed about the species that had endured it. Humanity, they wrote, was not a species that could not fight. They were a species that chose not to until they had no choice left, and, in the archives of the Reformed Council, preserved for future generations to study, was a single document that had become required reading for every diplomat, every military commander, and every leader who wanted to understand the new order of the galaxy, as the final testimony of Grand Hegemon Thavex, recorded in the last days before his death in the facility where he had spent decades watching the faces of the children he had murdered. The humans have a saying. He had written in a trembling hand, "Beware the fury of a patient man." We should have listened, we should have understood. We should have recognized that their patience was not weakness, but a warning that we were too arrogant to hear. They gave us 300 years to change. 300 years to treat them as equals. 300 years to choose a different path. And we wasted every single day. Now we live in their shadow. Not as slaves, but as students, learning the lessons they tried to teach us with words before they were forced to teach us with fire. If you are reading this, if you are a leader of your people, if you have the power to decide how your species treats others, then hear me now. Do not make the mistake we made. Do not test the patience of humanity, because when that patience runs out, no species will ever forget what comes next. The document was preserved under glass in the Council's Great Hall, where every delegate could see it on their way to negotiate the treaties and agreements that shaped the new galactic order, and above it, inscribed in letters of gold, was a simple phrase that humanity had chosen as the motto of the new era. Peace through respect, never again. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and humanity at long last, had found the home among the stars that they had been seeking for 300 years in the aftermath of the war. The galaxy held its breath and waited for the hammer to fall. Every species that had survived the conflict knew what came next. It was the same story that had played out 1,000 times across galactic history, the Eterna.